Order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Affairs. Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary made clear at his Kew lecture that the climate must be at the heart of all the FCDO does. When we do have that focus on climate adaptation and mitigation, we see economic growth globally and in our own country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rising death tolls from the wildfires in Los Angeles and the damage to our communities recently caused by storms Bert and Dara serve as clear reminders of escalating weather extremes and the urgent need to tackle the climate emergency. Can the Minister explain how the Government is actively driving efforts to cut emissions and champion clean energy, both in the UK and across the globe?
Our thoughts are with all of those hit by the dreadful crises that my honourable friend mentioned. At COP29, the UK showed leadership in setting an ambitious NDC to cut emissions by 81% by 2035. We are championing clean energy at home and abroad, including through the launch of the GB Energy Company and the Global Clean Power Alliance.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Former MI6 Chief Sir Richard Dearlove has warned against the risks of relying on China for Britain's energy infrastructure. What assessment has the Minister made of the involvement of Chinese supply chains in the Government's solar plans?
Minister.
This Government is determined to have a consistent and clear-eyed approach to China and to avoid the oscillation that we saw under previous governments. As a result of that, we're conducting a China audit that will look thoroughly at all of our relationships with China. We will compete where we must, challenge where we need to, and cooperate where that's necessary.
Shadow Minister Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government signed up to a $300 billion climate finance package at COP29, with the amount increasing by $50 billion to get a deal. Since then, ministers have not been able to give details of what our share will be, how much British taxpayers will fund, what will come from ODA, what will come from private enterprise and investment. So I'd like to ask the Minister, can she provide any details, and if not, will she commit to a timetable to disclose this information? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for her question, but she will surely understand that the COP agreement was about the global goal. The precise share for individual countries is worked out through the normal processes, and indeed it was her government which committed to the £11.6 billion climate finance goal, indeed a Conservative government which did that. Unlike the previous government, however, Mr. Speaker, we are determined to make sure that we fit within our responsibilities and deliver on that for the sake of our climate and indeed our economy. Thank you.
Richard Foord.
Number two, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. NATO is the cornerstone of UK and Euro-Atlantic security, and indeed the first act of this government was to publicly state our commitment to a NATO-first defence policy. We regularly discuss NATO with our allies. NATO foreign and defence ministers meet 3 times a year, with the most recent foreign ministers meeting in December, which both I and the Foreign Secretary attended.
Richard Foord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 75 years, NATO has stood as a bulwark against territorial acquisition. NATO is stronger when all of its members stand against territorial acquisition. So I wonder, what discussions does the Foreign Secretary plan to have with the President-elect of the United States about the status of Denmark, Greenland and Canada? And please could the Foreign Secretary remind President-elect Trump that when he pronounces on how he would like to expand the United States' sphere of influence, NATO's adversaries are also watching.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Foreign Secretary made clear last week, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and the future of their constitutional arrangements is a matter for the people and government of Greenland and indeed the Kingdom of Denmark. It'd be wrong to speculate on any policy decisions the incoming administration of President-elect Trump may make. Those are messages I delivered in a meeting with the Greenlandic Foreign Minister yesterday. But there are, rightly, important concerns about security in the Arctic, which is why I was proud to be one of the first British ministers in 10 years to attend the Arctic Circle Assembly and meet partners to discuss these issues just a few months ago.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Foreign Office on the inspired appointment for our new ambassador at Washington, DC? There aren't aren't many candidates who would be able to fill the shoes of Dame Karen Pierce, who has represented UK interests so exceptionally in New York, in the DC. She's an inspirational leader and a skilled diplomat. Lord Mandelson's appointment is unusual, however, because it is not often that circumstances demand that the UK appoints someone who's not a career diplomat to be our ambassador to such a key NATO ally. So to silence critics and to show respect to Parliament and its committees, would the Foreign Office agree that we should return to the policy of the previous Labour government and allow Lord Mandelson the time before he leaves for the United States to come before my committee? This will allow my colleagues to hear directly why the Prime Minister has appointed him to be the ambassador, to hear what his priorities are in this crucial diplomatic role.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question. We are absolutely convinced that Lord Mandelson will do an excellent job as our representative in Washington. It was a pleasure to meet with him last week and discuss his plans as he's preparing to go out on his post. Obviously, we have one ambassador at a time. I'm sure that we would consider any request that the Right Honourable Lady makes in due course in the normal way we do with requests from her committee.
Right, let's have Shadow Minister Andrew Rosindell.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the NATO alliance stands at the cornerstone of our defence and has been essential to the security of the free world. Given the importance of the Indo-Pacific Security Alliance, strengthening cooperation and dialogue with key allies in the region has been paramount, and our military base on Diego Garcia is absolutely vital British-American strategic asset. Yet, Mr. Speaker, ministers have failed to give answers to questions about its future or the costs involved with the proposed treaty with Mauritius. So, will the minister give one straight answer? Will he commit to this House to wait until after President Trump is in office and after he has had time to discuss this deal with the new administration before finalising any agreement with Mauritius? Yes or no?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Minister is absolutely right about the importance of security in the Indo-Pacific, and indeed when we see North Korean troops fighting in Russia and Ukraine, when we see Iranian missiles being used, when we see links with military companies elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific region supplying Russia, it's absolutely crucial that we see global security as one. I've answered many questions, Mr. Speaker, as you know, Mr. Speaker, on the matter that he refers to. Our deal secures the future security of the base on Diego Garcia. It has support across the US administration and indeed across the United States national security apparatus, and will come forward with details in due course.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend points out, President-elect Trump has threatened to use force to seize the Panama Canal and Greenland. He's promised tariffs of 25% on Canada and Mexico. Whatever else we can predict about the presidency that begins next Monday, we know that it will be unpredictable. So can I therefore ask the Minister what steps his government has taken to Trump-proof UK foreign policy so that we cannot be held hostage in the security, economic or climate realms by a president who puts short-term deals ahead of long-term relationships? And in particular, what specific steps has this government taken to accelerate an improvement in the UK's relationship with European partners since the 5th of November?
Well, on his last point, he knows very well the commitments that we've made to European security through NATO and indeed, of course, through our reset of relations with not only the European Union but indeed across Europe, and the leadership we've shown, for example, tackling the Russian shadow fleet, working with partners across Europe as we started at the EPC process. The special relationship, Mr. Speaker, endures. It has endured. It will continue to endure. We look forward to working with President-elect Trump and his team on a range of issues. I gave the answer that I had already on the relation to Greenland. And of course, we respect in relation to Panama the Torrijos-Carter treaties, and we recognise the important role that Panama plays in world trade.
Sarah Green.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 4 and 14 together. The UK will continue to use all diplomatic avenues to press the warring parties in Sudan into a permanent ceasefire to enable unrestricted humanitarian access and to protect civilians.
Mr. Speaker, we on these benches welcome the humanitarian support the government is giving to Sudan. We also recognise that greater protections are needed for women, children and ethnic minority groups. In light of the failure of the United Nations to back safe areas, can I ask the Minister what the UK is doing to create safe zones for schools and hospitals in Sudan.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful for the Honourable Lady's support for the measures that the UK Government has been taking. Clearly, there are dreadful problems when it comes to civilian protection within Sudan. The UK put forward a resolution with Sierra Leone to the Security Council focused on the protection of civilians. It was appalling that Russia vetoed that resolution. We will continue to use every avenue available to us to promote their safety. Thank you.
Mr Ward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for her reply and the focus she's given this important issue. But, Mr Speaker, the suffering, famine and displacement in Sudan is only intensifying. So can the Minister outline the practical steps a bit further that the Government's taking to try and protect human rights, promote peace and bring an end to this appalling conflict?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for mentioning the extreme need to act on what is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The UK has doubled its aid to Sudan. We have sought to use the UN Security Council, as I mentioned before, but I would also mention that we ensured through the Foreign Secretary that there was a Sudan session with the G7 plus Arab Quint foreign ministers, and also that the UK Special Representative to Sudan has actually visited Sudan. That occurred for the first time since the conflict in December. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What the Right Honourable Lady had to say yesterday. But in terms of delivery of aid, it's clearly being used as a weapon in this conflict. Can she tell us what steps are being taken to actually make sure that the aid gets through to those people most in need on the ground in Sudan?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising this, and I know that he shares our deep concern about the impact of restrictions on aid. We've particularly seen that now feeding through into the famine assessment from the IPC that came out at the end of last year. There must be above all, an opening of crossings that is permanent. We were, of course, pleased to see the Adre crossing extended, open for 3 months. That must be opened permanently. We need to see also cross-line availability of aid. We need to have the warring parties focused on humanitarian need, not on pursuing a war that they both appear to think they can win, but which civilians are suffering appallingly as a result of. Thank you.
Right, Matt.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And following on from the question by the Right Honourable Gentleman, I welcome the Government's ongoing support for the humanitarian effort in Sudan and the wider region, but does the Minister share my concern that aid risks not reaching those who need it most, and will she continue to put pressure on Sudan for the Adre crossing to be kept open permanently so that that vital aid can get to those who need it most? And can she update the House on what steps she's doing in this area?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for being so clear about the challenges around aid coming into Sudan and then being delivered to those who so desperately need it. We will keep pushing on the need for the Adre crossing to remain open. We will also keep pushing on the need for aid workers to be protected within Sudan, also for UN staff to be able to access Sudan as well. And of course we will work with those on the ground, and I would particularly mention there the emergency response rooms who are delivering essential mutual aid. Thank you.
Sir Stephen Sander.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 5.
Foreign Secretary.
Both our Prime Ministers have committed to an ambitious refresh of the comprehensive strategic partnership. They announced the UK-India trade talks will relaunch, and this will deliver our joint ambition to take the UK-India relationship to even greater heights, and one of a handful of countries that will determine whether we meet the global warming limit of 1.5 degrees.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is indeed an exciting year to help improve our economic growth and indeed our trading relationship with India. Two nations with an intertwined history with common democratic ideals that face the risks of a dangerous world and a warming planet. As co-chair of the India APPG, it is one of my priorities to strengthen our economic and strategic relationship. So can the Secretary of State outline what he will be doing to help get a UK-India trade deal, a good one, over the line, and in particular the exchange of green technologies to help prevent and reduce our warming planet?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. It was important to get to India just a few weeks into office. And I might just pray and aid my great-grandmother, who was from Calcutta on my mother's side. I look forward to inviting Foreign Minister Jaishankar to Britain later on in the spring. I think it is important that we've got our strategic partnership going forward. We've relaunched the FTA. We said that that is a floor, not a ceiling, on our ambition, and it was important to see a delegation of Indian businessmen meeting both with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, myself and the Prime Minister just a few weeks ago before Christmas.
Dame Caroline Downage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Among our greatest UK exports are our culture and our creative industries. So I'm keen to hear what conversations the Foreign Secretary's had with international counterparts, not only to improve the opportunity for British artists to tour, particularly post-Brexit, but also to take advantage of some opportunities, appetite for bilateral cultural agreements, which has been articulated by a number of our overseas counterparts.
We're very grateful for the question, and the Honourable Lady will be pleased that very shortly we will be launching our new Soft Power Council, specifically to look in detail at this issue. I was very pleased to secure further funding for the BBC World Service in the spending review. That was very important, and we continue to discuss, particularly with European allies, as we move forward on our reset, what more we can do for those touring artists.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Speaker, this weekend we had the indignity of seeing the Chancellor of the Exchequer fleeing the financial meshes left at home in the United Kingdom, while embracing the Chinese Communist Party, their friends over there, and their Chinese government in a desperate attempt to secure money from them. So can the Foreign Secretary explain how this new love-in with one of the biggest threats to our national security and freedom helps our national interests? What message does this send to Jimmy Lai, to the Hong Kong BNOs facing threats in our country and to others living in fear of China? And is this government's reset with China the cause of the delay in implementing the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme?
Well, I'm really grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. The chutzpah, the brass neck at which she comes to the dispatch box after a period where we had about 7 different China policies from the last government, and the huge 22 billion black hole that they left in the economy. I might remind her too that President Trump has invited the Chinese president to the inauguration. Trade with the US and China has grown, but it's also the case that we can protect our national security just as the United States. That's why we will compete with China where we need to. We will challenge China where we must, but we must cooperate. And there are important areas of trade because we want to see growth in our economy that we're absolutely minded to move forward with.
Jake Richards.
Mr. Speaker.
Ensuring the safe release of all hostages, including British national Emily Damari and 3 others with strong UK links, is a top priority for this government. We have continually supported hostage talks and support the efforts of the United States, Egyptian and Qatari negotiators. We are exercising every diplomatic lever to secure their immediate release and unconditional release, and call on all parties to show flexibility at the negotiating table.
Jake Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Foreign Secretary's answer. Last month I had the privilege of meeting Mandy, Emily's mother, to discuss the plight that her family finds herself in and the campaign and efforts that they are taking to secure her release. I know that the Foreign Secretary met with Mandy just yesterday in Israel. I spoke to her after that meeting. She was very grateful for that meeting. Can I ask what steps the government are taking to secure humanitarian access before release to the hostages, which Hamas are disgracefully avoiding, and what particular pressures are being put on Qatar and Egypt in that regard?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. It was important to be with Mandy Damari in Israel yesterday, to be in Saudi Arabia just before it, to speak to my Egyptian counterpart particularly, and to press these issues, but also to speak to the Israelis. As has been said by Joe Biden, we may well be on the brink of a deal, and I know this whole House will want to see that deal emerge in the coming days and to see Mandy come home. And rest assured that humanitarian access, as we have continued to press for the people of Gaza, is hugely important. But it's as important for those hostages. It will take some time for them to come out, and they need that humanitarian access.
Excellent. Jim Shamp.
Can I thank the Minister very much for his answer? Last Easter of last year, I had the opportunity, Mr Speaker, to meet Amanda Dalmari in Israel and speak to some of the hostages whose families were kidnapped by Hamas on that terrible, unfortunately memorable October the 7th. The families have had a yo-yo of emotions. Will they get free? Will they not get free? And all of a sudden, there's a possibility. Can I ask the Minister this question? What help can the families have directly to ensure that the roller coaster of emotion that they have went through over the last year and a half, they can get the help that they need from our government? Thank you.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. We want to see Emily Damari free, and all the hostages, particularly the UK-linked hostages. And we know from our contact with their families, and I'm thinking about the moving event that we had in Number 10 on the 30th of September, that there will be deep, deep psychological scars. And we must commit to do all we can through our humanitarian support and ongoing to support those hostages in their process of recovery.
Can I say, Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Pretty?
Mr Speaker, all members of the House will praise the courage and resilience of the hostage families and have the hostages in their thoughts right now, particularly Emily's mother, Mandy, and Emily herself. With reports of the progress being made with the hostage negotiations is truly welcome, including obviously the discussions that the Foreign Secretary is having or has had post his visit and during his visit to Israel. So can he give an update on what information he's received about the proof of life of those hostages that are being held? And importantly, what resources will our government be providing to support the hostages through this release process over the period of time that is now being speculated, and also a sustainable end to this awful conflict?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. First, on the issue of proof of life, we do all we can to establish this. She will understand it is fast moving, and even post any deal, before hostages come out, can take some degree of time. So I would not want to be pushed on that issue at the dispatch box, but I want to reassure her that we are doing all we can to continue to make that necessary assessment. As I say, we are, I hope, on the brink of a deal. It will be the first phase of a deal that will probably last 6 weeks, and that is important to bear in mind. All of us in this House hoped to get to a ceasefire and the necessary rebuilding of Gaza with Israel safe and secure, and that will be very important, so that the Middle East can move forward in an atmosphere of peace.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 7, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 7 and 16 together. Mr Speaker, we unequivocally condemn Iran's attacks on Israel in April and October 2024. These attacks and Iran's ongoing support for its proxies and partners have destabilised the region and fuelled escalation. Alongside our allies and partners, we will continue to hold Iran to account for this behaviour, including through sanctions, addressing Iranian weapons proliferation, and maintaining our permanent defence presence in the region.
Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for that answer. Clearly, we all hope that there will be a deal to release the hostages held illegally in Gaza. And with the position that Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis, the proxies of Iran, are on the brink of defeat, the reality is that the risk to the region now is that Iran takes direct action. Given that we want to see the end of that despotic regime that brutalises the people of Iran, now is the time for sanctions, and the proscription of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps for once and for all. Will the Minister take the necessary action to bring that regime to its knees so that democracy can be restored to Iran?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I recognise the honourable member has asked questions about the prescription of the IRGC a number of times in this chamber, and I can assure him that we are working urgently on measures to take the necessary action to deter the Iranian state from posing a threat to this country and to the region, and we will continue to update the House in due course on that.
Orchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And following on from the question from my honourable friend, with the re-election of President Trump in the US, we're likely to see a return to his policy of maximum pressure in order to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Yeah. What is the Secretary of State's view on this approach, and will he support the government to support our allies in the United States of America? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work closely with the American administration. We look forward to doing so with the new administration. It is regrettably true that Iran's nuclear programme has never been more advanced, Mr. Speaker, and it threatens international peace and security. We remain determined that Iran must never develop a nuclear weapon, and we remain committed to a diplomatic solution to achieve that.
Danny Beales.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 8, 12 and 22 together. Mr. Speaker, the scale of humanitarian suffering in Gaza is catastrophic and unacceptable. The UK condemns Israel's restrictions on aid in the strongest terms. This is a man-made crisis, and Israel must act immediately to address it.
Danny Beale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Aid agencies I've spoken to are particularly concerned about access to medical facilities and critical shortages of medical supplies in Gaza, and in particular northern Gaza. In light of this, I'd like to ask the Minister what steps they are taking to practically get additional medical supplies to Gaza to reach both Palestinians and Israeli hostages in desperate humanitarian situations.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this incredibly important issue. I saw for myself in Jordan in December how medical aid had been blocked from entering Gaza. As I said before, the UK government's position that we've articulated at every possible juncture is that restrictions on life-saving aid must end. The UK continues to provide core healthcare relief items and has provided 76,000 wound care kits, 1.3 million items of medicine and critical funding for UK Med to run their field hospitals in Gaza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for her response, and indeed welcome the efforts of the Foreign Secretary in securing a sustainable ceasefire and release of hostages. Many of my constituents have expressed concern over the recent raid of Kamal Adwan Hospital, which was one of the last healthcare facilities still operating in Gaza. And as we've heard, during that raid, the hospital director, Dr. Sophia, along with several of his staff, was detained. International law prohibits the detention of medical staff in conflict zones. What is the Minister doing to secure the release of these medical staff so that Gaza civilians can continue to access essential medical care?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is right to raise this critically important issue. We have raised the protection of healthcare facilities and the detention of healthcare workers directly with the Israeli government. The Minister for the Middle East has specifically raised the detention of Dr. Hassam Abu Safia with both the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister and with Israel's Ambassador to the UK. Thank you.
Andy MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, seemingly the ceasefire apparently being progressed is the same as the one drafted in May, then deliberately frustrated by members of the Israeli government. Sadly, in that time, hostages and those falsely imprisoned have remained captive and so many lives lost. No doubt the Minister can assure the public that should the ceasefire be confirmed, every effort will be made to get aid and supplies to the Palestinians, particularly northern Gaza. But does she agree with me that this means that neither the Israeli military activity nor Israeli legislation preventing the work of UNRWA can be accepted?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There absolutely must be a surge of aid into Gaza. That will obviously be critical after a ceasefire, but impediments to aid that remain now must also be removed. On the issue of UNRWA, of course, we've discussed this previously within this House. The UK Government's position is that UNRWA must be able to continue to operate, the only organisation with the scale and depth that is necessary in order to get that life-saving aid to people who need it. Thank you.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. UAV Engines Limited, based in Staffordshire, manufacture the engines powering the Hermes 450 drone, which is manufactured by Elbit Systems in the UK and used by the Israeli military in the Gaza Strip. Israel regards the Hermes 450 as a critical asset, providing strike capabilities. Will the Foreign Secretary confirm if these drones, engines or any other parts for the Hermes 450 drone are still being supplied to Israel from the UK?
Mr Speaker, the UK has the most robust arms control regime within, indeed, any global comparison. This government was determined to ensure that we fulfilled our legal responsibilities, that we did assess fully, legally, arms exportation licences, and I can confirm to the House that since the 2nd of September there have been no extant UK export licences for items to Israel that we assess are for use in military operations in Gaza. Thank you.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week, Hamas fired rockets at the Erez crossing, demonstrating once again the terror group's intention to disrupt aid delivery and prolong the suffering of Gazans as well as Israelis. So what assistance has the UK government offered to support repairing that crossing and support Israel as they get the much-needed aid into Gaza?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and we remain directly in contact with Israel, with UN agencies and with other partners in the region. That's obviously at ministerial level, but also, of course, with our Special Representative for Humanitarian Issues in the OPTs. The issues of crossings and their openness and safety have been raised repeatedly by the Special Representative and indeed by members of this government. And of course that also covers attacks by the terrorist Hamas on those crossings. Thank you.
Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. While Gaza stands on the verge of absolute annihilation, the Israeli ambassador to the UK has repeatedly expressed opposition to a two-state solution, emphasising that that is not a feasible solution. Given that the UK has consistently expressed support for a two-state solution, but does not yet recognise one of these states, will the Minister clarify any discussions that they've had with the Israeli ambassador?
Humanitarian aid, but I'm sure that you might be able to.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK Government's position is indeed that there must be a two-state solution. The new government has been determined to do all we can towards that end, Mr Speaker, and that will include advocating for that solution at every juncture, including indeed with embassies, including, as would be expected, the Israeli embassy. Thank you.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Question 9, Mr Speaker.
The UK remains committed to supporting Israel's security and wider regional stability in the face of threats from malign actors such as Iran. We're clear that Israel must act in accordance with international humanitarian law and do more to protect civilians, hospitals and those who are in desperate need of their services.
And Jordan.
I thank the Secretary of State for his response. Notwithstanding the hope that we all have of a ceasefire, there remain ongoing atrocities taking place daily in Gaza, with the killing of children, the bombing of hospitals and the threat now of banning aid at the end of the month. Can the Secretary of State explain exactly what the Israeli government has to do to persuade the UK government to impose sanctions or to ban all arms sales or to recognise the State of Palestine?
Well, can I say, since coming to office, we've taken significant action, calling, of course, for a ceasefire. We've been calling for a ceasefire since December of last year, suspending relevant arms sales, as has been set out by my right honourable friend, and increasing the amount of aid to the occupied Palestinian territories, and we are in steadfast support of UNRWA. Israel remains an important ally. We have an important trading relationship, 6.1 billion last year, 38,000 British jobs. I'm sorry, any discussion of sanctions is just not correct.
James Cleverley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I invite the Foreign Secretary to welcome the appointment of Nawaf Salam and invite him to comment on the implications of that for our relationship with Lebanon, with Israel, and the influence that Iran has in that region? And what does he intend to do to ensure that that positive step improves our relationship with Israel, with Lebanon, and the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, I'm very grateful for an opportunity to speak about Lebanon. The developments in Lebanon over the last few days are a transformation, potentially, for the region. To have the presidency now and a new Prime Minister, the opportunity to see that country and to see Hezbollah's capability in that country diminished is something that all of the international community must grab hold of. As he knows from his time in office, the UK contribution to the Lebanese Armed Forces is a very important contribution and one that the Lebanese treasure. We intend to continue that and go further over the coming months, as I know he will welcome.
Monica Hall.
Question 10, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I pay tribute to the honourable member's work overseas as a British Council former Director of Communications? I understand she was posted in London, Paris, Tokyo and Shanghai. My assignments were rather different in my overseas posting, so I'm rather jealous. The British Council's Board of Trustees is responsible for their financial sustainability. As an FCDO arm's-length body, the British Council receives £162.5 million of grant and aid funding. That was for 2024-2025. And my noble friend Baroness Chapman oversees this as the Minister responsible. This contribution supports the Council's role as a soft power asset, promoting UK arts and culture, education and the English language.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I declare another interest as the officer of the APPG for the British Council? Mr. Speaker, the British Council delivers over £1 billion worth of global impact for the UK every year. During the pandemic, it was forced to close 18 country operations, none of which has since reopened. The then Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, gave them an emergency loan, but set it out on commercial terms. The interest of this loan is costing the British Council £14 million a year. So can the Minister help the British Council keep delivering on the government's growth and security and soft power objectives? And will he consider reviewing the terms of the Council's loan, an extension on the date for beginning repayments, reducing the commercial rate of interest, and or redesignating the loan to a form of non-recourse?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers are aware of the issues in relation to the £200 million loan. It was made, as the honourable member said, on commercial terms in order to be compliant with the UK subsidy control regime. On the 6th of January, my ministerial colleagues, the Foreign Secretary and Minister Chapman, met with the CEO of the British Council to discuss these issues.
Fabian Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've already heard, the British Council is vital to the UK's soft power across the world. Now, at such an important time for the promotion of our values of democracy, freedom and human rights, reports that it may have to close 30 to 40 operations is deeply worrying. What steps is the Minister taking to secure the future of the British Council's existing programmes?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend's long commitment on these issues. Soft power is an issue of the most vital importance, particularly in this contested world, and I'm very pleased to confirm, as the Foreign Secretary already has, that we are establishing a soft power council in the coming days. That is an important initiative, and the British Council is going to be an important part of that work. In relation to country officers, the British Council does retain a significant physical presence in over 100 countries, which is welcome, and has a growing presence online, which is to be encouraged.
David Smith.
Question 11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome my honourable friend's appointment as the new UK Special Envoy for the Freedom of Religious Belief. As part of our intense diplomatic engagement with international partners and indeed with the interim Syrian authorities, Mr. Speaker, we have consistently advocated for an inclusive political transition and underlined the importance of protecting the rights of religious and ethnic minorities.
David Smith.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer and for his welcome and for his commitment to, and that of the Department, to work with the nascent Syrian government as they seek to protect and respect religious minorities. But I'm sure he's aware that over Christmas there were attacks by HTS fighters on the Christian majority town of Malua, and also some reports of attacks on Alawite communities. So can I ask him what more he and his department can do in order to work with the Syrian government as they seek to build a society in which all religious communities can take part in that society without fear of religious persecution?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the House would expect, we follow reports of such incidents in Syria very closely. I was discussing some of these incidents with members of Syrian civil society just last night, and the Foreign Secretary has raised these questions directly with the interim Foreign Minister of the Syrian authorities. We will continue to call for all parties in Syria in this moment of transition to do the utmost to respect the rights of all religious minorities across the country.
Wilson.
Minorities can only be protected if there is stable and representative government in Syria. I met with some members of the Syrian Democratic Council this morning who are concerned that the call for dialogue is not inclusive and that minorities are not being protected. What steps can the government take to ensure that that does not happen and that there is inclusive dialogue? And will the government, for example, link the lifting of sanctions against Syria to the action to protect minorities and to the inclusion of the Syrian Democratic Council in future constitutional arrangements?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. It is vital that the new Syria includes representation of all of its people and that all Syrians can see themselves represented in the government that will follow. We are supporting an inclusive political process that must respect the rights of ethnic and religious minorities, and we will continue in our efforts.
Peter Swallow.
Number 13, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Foreign Secretary.
As I made clear in my Locarno speech on the 9th of February, tackling irregular migration is an FCDO priority. We regularly engage with counterparts in priority countries to strengthen collaboration on organised crime and secure migrant returns.
Ms. Swallow.
The proposed sanctions on people smugglers are a world first, designed to deter and disrupt these vile criminals and the supply chain that enables them. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this is an important step in smashing the gangs?
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman. This is the first of a kind, and we hope that other allies will follow us in going after the enablers of these gangs, and with the ability to issue travel bans, to freeze assets, and to do all we can to disrupt this illegal trade. But I emphasise, alongside the sanctions, are the new joint unit in the department, the huge amount of work that we've done on returns, and it's really important that that's up 23% across the country, and the work that we do upstream with ODA funding of 84 million announced as we came into government back in July.
Robin Swan.
Question 15.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would firstly like to offer my deep condolences to all of those affected by the dreadful wildfires we've seen in California, and indeed in relation to the terror attacks we saw in Las Vegas and, of course, New Orleans, where tragically we also lost a British national. I know the thoughts of the whole House are with the United States at this very, very difficult time. The 250th anniversary of US independence will be a significant moment to recognise the work of generations of Americans and Britons over a quarter of a millennium to build the special relationship. We've come a long way since 1776, and I am excited by the ambitious US plans to mark the occasion and look forward to celebrating our partnership and our special relationship in 2026.
Robin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I join the Minister with his opening comments? Mr. Speaker, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence actually presents a unique opportunity to promote cultural and historical links between Northern Ireland and the United States, because at least 5 signatories of the Declaration of Independence have direct Ulster links. The Declaration itself was printed by an Ulster Scot, John Dunlop from Strabane. The Great Seal of the United States was designed by Charles Thompson from Upperlands, and 17 of the US presidents can claim Ulster Scots roots. However, Mr. Speaker, the government's introduction of an electronic travel authorisation scheme will actually have a devastating impact on tourism.
The anniversary will have passed if we don't get to the end. Come on!
Well, Mr. Speaker, we learn new things every day, and I'm delighted to hear what he set out about the heritage in his part of the world with the United States. Of course, that's, Mr. Speaker, in my own family. Indeed, my own family dates back to the late 1700s in Pennsylvania. But later on, we're not sure which side they fought on, but later on, my grandfather came over in the Second World War to fight alongside us against Nazi tyranny in Europe. So those special relationships are part of all our communities, all of our families, and we absolutely want to celebrate them across all of our countries.
Come to topicals. Alex Smith.
Speaker.
Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're strengthening our work abroad on the priorities of the British people to deliver the government's plan for change, the first country in the world to develop sanctions regimes specifically targeting illegal migration, reforms to strengthen the Foreign Office role in attracting investment, securing new business deals, and tough diplomacy to keep up support for Ukraine and bring stability to the Middle East.
Liz Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the progress that was made by COP29 in Baku and this government's leadership on climate change. Nepal is at the sharp end of dealing with climate change. Late last year, we saw 200 deaths from floods in Kathmandu. What is this government doing to support this nation that has been a partner and a friend to the UK over many years?
Well, my honourable friend will be pleased that we announced a £38.5 million resilience, adaptation and inclusion programme so that Nepal could deal with a disaster risk. And that follows £58.5 million in terms of climate-smart development over an 8-year programme. Our relationship with Nepal, particularly on the climate issue, is essential and very important.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dave Priti Patel.
Can the Foreign Secretary explain why he's surrendering the Chagos Islands and front-loading payments to the government of Mauritius to lease the base at Diego Garcia back at a cost of £9 billion to UK taxpayers? And if this is such a good deal, why is he so secretive about it?
I know that the Shadow Foreign Secretary is new to the job, but I just remind her that it was her government that did 10 rounds of negotiation on this issue. We picked it up and remind her that both the White House, the State Department and the Pentagon believe that this is a good deal, as does the Indian government.
Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the Foreign Secretary's meetings over the weekend in Saudi Arabia and with the new Foreign Minister of Syria, can he explain what conditions he has stipulated regarding the removal of sanctions in Syria, and what kind of timeframe has he discussed with them?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Raoul raises a very important issue. We will judge this new Syrian government by their actions, not their words. We are, alongside allies, reviewing sanctions at the moment. I won't comment in detail on that, but I'm very, very clear. We want to see an inclusive government. We want this government to prosper. We've been pleased at what we've seen so far, but as has already been mentioned, some of what we have seen on the ground has not been good. We will judge them by their words, not their action, and we will not go faster than she would expect us to.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Follow up on that question. I'm grateful to the Minister for coming to the event that I hosted with Syrian diaspora yesterday. He will know that they are very keen to support their homeland to rebuild, and I wonder if the ministers would look at ways in which we can change the sanctions just to ensure that ordinary citizens can send remittances back to help rebuild crumbling public services.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for the question and his long work on Syria issues, and I was very glad to join him and so many inspiring members of Syrian civil society who are keen to make a contribution. We will do what we can to try and enable the new Syria to be a success and for the Syrian civil society here and across the world to play their full role in that.
Democrat spokesperson Colin Mill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is strong evidence that Russia has sought to influence the outcome of elections in Georgia, Moldova and Romania, and may now be doing so in Germany. Is the Foreign Secretary confident that the current measures to track Russian money and misinformation in the UK is sufficient to protect the UK from similar interference? And does he think that the role of Russian money in funding UK political parties should be investigated to ensure that our elections remain free and fair?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will be aware of the important work of the Defending Democracy Task Force, which works across government here in the United Kingdom. We closely monitor developments in other countries. We've stood alongside our European partners, including specifically Moldova, in response to these efforts at interference. And, of course, we've appointed recently Margaret Hodge as our illicit finance and hypocrisy champion to tackle many of the issues he raises in relation to money.
Do you want one of my principles?
Chris Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now over a year since Imran Khan was imprisoned in Pakistan, and since then there have been reports of widespread intimidation and human rights abuses as well. So can the Minister set out what steps the UK government is taking to protect human rights, democracy and the rule of law in Pakistan?
Mr. Speaker, the UK government consistently urges Pakistani authorities to act in line with their international obligations and respect fundamental freedoms and human rights. I raised these issues during my visit to Pakistan in November and in my statement to the House on the 28th of November. We issued a further statement on the 23rd of December about the role of military courts. We made it clear that the UK support individuals' rights to freedom of assembly and expression, and we will continue to do so.
Sir Desmond Sway.
Why is the government acting with such dispatch to secure the agreement with Mauritius? What's the rush?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said in this House on many occasions, there is no rush. No, Mr. Speaker, it's a fact to see. It is a fact, Mr. Speaker. The negotiations on this were going on for 2 years under his previous government, 10 rounds of failed negotiations. We've secured a deal that is in all of our interests and one that crucially secures our base and our national security interests and those of our allies on Diego Garcia.
Kate Osborne.
What were you talking about for 2 years?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies. Violence in eastern DRC is escalating, with both the M23 group and government forces claiming recent advances. The toll on civilians is devastating, with rising deaths, displacement, rape and gender-based violence. Can the Minister outline how the government is supporting the Angolan-led Luanda process towards a ceasefire?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising the deeply concerning ongoing conflict in eastern DRC and its devastating consequences. Our humanitarian programme, which amounts to £114 million, is delivering life-saving emergency assistance, and I can reassure her that Lord Collins has met with the leaders of DRC and Rwanda to urge them to engage in good faith in the Luanda process to bring an end to the horrific fighting. Thank you.
The House, Sir Edward Lee.
Leaving aside whether it's wise to spend £9 billion on giving away what's already yours, as the Trump administration is now less than a week away, would it not be wise to wait another week, pause these negotiations, have a quiet word with the incoming Secretary of State in America, and then work out what is in our interest and that of the interest of our closest ally?
Mr. Speaker, I'd simply refer him to the answers we've given previously on this. There is strong support from across the United States national security apparatus, from the State Department, from the White House, from the Pentagon, and we are convinced that this is a deal that has protections in it to protect our national security and that of our allies, most importantly the United States.
Paul Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I draw the House's attention to the Register of Members' interest regarding a recent trip I had to Kosovo. Whilst I was in Kosovo, I met with the President and the Prime Minister, who were seriously concerned about incursions into their northern border, where KFOR troops are based between them and Serbia. Therefore, can Ministers please provide a progress update as to the bilateral security agreement between Kosovo and the United Kingdom? That peace was hard won and it must be retained. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, he's absolutely right about our historic role and responsibilities in relation to Kosovo, and indeed KFOR makes a vital contribution to maintaining a safe and secure environment in Kosovo, and of course UK troops play a key part in that. We engage very, very closely with our partners in Kosovo and indeed across the region, and we continue to urge Serbia and Kosovo to engage constructively in the EU-facilitated dialogue. In recent months, I've spoken to both Prime Minister Kurti and Foreign Minister Đurić of Serbia.
Paul Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wimbledon has one of the largest Korean populations in the UK, and there's widespread concern in the community about the ongoing situation in South Korea. Can the Foreign Secretary tell the House what communications, if any, the government has had with acting President Choi or suspended President Yoon concerning the current situation?
The UK government has been in touch with South Koreans as our great friends, and we continue to support the arrangements there and to support any democratic moves towards stability and ongoing relationship with the UK.
Mary Glyndŵr.
Mr. Speaker, the Israeli government has stated that its presence in the Golan Heights buffer zone is defensive, limited and temporary. Given that the Israeli cabinet has recently approved a financial package to increase the number of illegal settlements in the Golan Heights, what assessment has the Minister made of the veracity of Israel's statement?
Well, my honourable friend will be pleased that I raised this issue directly with the Israeli Foreign Minister yesterday. He wanted to emphasise that this was a temporary measure in their national interests, and I emphasised that the Syrian Foreign Minister had made it clear to me that they stand by the 1974 commitment and they do not want to seek any escalation with their Israeli neighbour.
Lincoln.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tower Hamlets planning officers have rejected China's application to build a super embassy there, but rather than put them through the appeals process, as anyone else would have to go through, the Foreign Secretary has got the Deputy Prime Minister to call in that application. So my question is to the Foreign Secretary, why the special treatment, and does he not realise how dodgy it's going to look if she finally does decide for China?
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman that all due process has been followed in the normal way. This is the same as any planning application, and the implication of what he has just said in relation to the Deputy Prime Minister is quite unsavoury.
John MacDonald.
Could I ask the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary, to update us on the representations that he's made and the Prime Minister has made to the President of Egypt to secure the release of Alaa Abdel Fattah. His mother, Layla, is with us in the gallery today and has gone beyond 100 days on hunger strike, and we're desperate to secure the release of Alaa.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. The Prime Minister wrote to President Sisi on the 26th of December and the 8th of January. The National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, was in Egypt on the 2nd of February. I met with the Egyptian Foreign Minister in Saudi Arabia on Sunday. This remains our #1 issue. We have raised it on every single occasion, and we continue to press for clemency, for understanding, and for his release.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The official readout from Operation Kowtow, the Chancellor's mission to Beijing, says that she, and I quote, urged China to cease its support for Russia's industrial base, which is allowing Russia to maintain its illegal war against Ukraine. Did the Chancellor, Mr. Speaker, elicit any such assurances? And if not, what does it mean for the Foreign Secretary's supposed reset of relations with the people of the Great Hall?
Can I just remind the honourable gentleman that it was our last Foreign Secretary that had a pint with President Xi. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, as she was able to outline, was able to raise all of the issues: Jimmy Lai, the security law in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and a whole range of issues. You only are able to do that by engagement.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Friends in Gaza and across the Middle East, together with many of us here, are all hoping and praying that a ceasefire will happen this time. Does the Minister agree that the Palestinians of Gaza must be able to move freely to return to their homes or what is left of them, regardless of whether they are currently in Gaza or have fled elsewhere? And in the event of a ceasefire, will the UK convene an international meeting on Gaza's reconstruction?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for continuing to press these issues. It was very important to be in Israel yesterday to talk about what might come when we get that ceasefire, the role, of course, that the UK wants to play, both in ensuring that Israel have their security, but working with other partners to ensure reconstruction.
Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The rights of women in Afghanistan have been under systematic assault since the Taliban's return to power in 2021. They've been all but entirely excluded from public life. They're barred from attending school and university, and in many areas they cannot leave their homes without a male guardian present. So what pressure is the UK government putting on the Taliban to ensure that women and girls can go back to school?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the Honourable Lady. We are deeply concerned by the appalling erosion of women and girls' rights in Afghanistan. We're seeking to use every avenue to exert pressure, and I'm pleased to remind the House that on the 9th of January I announced that the UK had formally joined the list of countries pledging political support to the initiative to refer Afghanistan to the ICJ for violations of CEDAW. Thank you.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, can my right honourable friends update the House on the implementation of the advisory opinion from the ICJ on the occupied Palestinian territories, particularly in relation to the consequences to the UK and other nation-states?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to consider the advisory opinion of the ICJ carefully. It is a far-reaching opinion which took months in the production, and we hope to be able to report back soon.
Sian Burry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To follow up on the case of Alaa Abdel Fattah in Egypt, can the Secretary of State tell me when he expects a substantial response to his engagement with the Egyptian government? And can he confirm that he will not travel to Egypt unless he is confident he can return with Alaa?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that our relationship with Egypt is multifaceted. This House today have discussed that hope of a hostage deal, and she will understand the importance that the Egyptians play in that. But as I have said, I raised this on Sunday. I raised it on the 20th of December. I have pressed for his release. We will continue to do all we can, the Prime Minister and the NSA. In the end, this is in the hands of the Egyptians.
Damien Hayden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Turkey has been increasingly threatening interventions beyond Syria. They've given shelter to Hamas and have announced a new programme of developing long-range weapons. So, as a fellow NATO ally, how will the government work with Ankara to secure peace and stability in the Middle East?
I met with my opposite number in Saudi Arabia at the weekend and to discuss the issues in northeast Syria. He, of course, raised his long-standing concerns about Kurdish groups in the northeast, and I made it very, very clear, along with many, many allies, that we do not want to see further escalation in Syria at this time. We continue to be in dialogue with a very close NATO ally.
The Minister keeps telling the House that negotiations with Mauritius have been going on for 2 years. So can he just explain to the House why he is so reluctant to extend those negotiations by just 1 week until the Trump administration takes office, which may take a very different view of the negotiations to the Biden administration?
Mr. Speaker, I just simply refer to the answers that I've repeatedly given. This is a deal which is in the interests of the United Kingdom, the interests of the United States. It's been supported by all parts of the United States administration. There is no rush. There are ongoing discussions, but we're not going to give a running commentary, Mr. Speaker.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Jagtar Singh Johal, remains in arbitrary detention in India for over 7 years now. The Secretary of State and his entire ministerial team have been extremely generous with their time and assistance to help resolve the situation. Can I seek the Minister's assurance that these efforts are ongoing?
Ministers have engaged frankly with counterparts in India on Mr Johal's case, pushing for faster progress towards a resolution, including the call for an investigation into allegations of torture by the authorities.
Andrew Mitchell.
Mr Speaker, the Government is right to continue the all-party approach to the next IDA replenishment of the World Bank. Extremely good value for taxpayer money. But will the Foreign Secretary press the Treasury to match what my right honourable friend, the former Chancellor, the member for Godalming and Ash, did in adding £2.5 billion to the 0.5 ODA budget to help defray some of the costs of the first-year asylum seekers which that budget bears? Otherwise, we will be spending more development money in UK postal districts than we will in Africa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising this issue. Of course, he understands deeply the fact that under Conservative governments we saw those so-called in-donor refugee costs spiralling out of control, a system that was not being brought under any kind of coherent plan by previous governments. Now there is a plan, Mr Speaker, being delivered by the Home Secretary. We are determined to ensure those costs are brought down. Thank you.
Bergen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has rightly imposed widespread sanctions on Russia for its war crimes. Earlier in this session, he responded to the subject of sanctions on Israel by referring to the fact that that talk is incorrect because of the value of trade and Israel's historic status as an ally. Surely a war crime is a war crime, whoever commits it. All lives are equal. International law is international law. So can I invite the Foreign Secretary to explain to the House this difference of approach between war crimes committed by Russia and war crimes committed by Israel?
We're on the brink, we hope, of a ceasefire deal. It was very important to be in Israel yesterday, and I remind the honourable gentleman, this is one of the toughest regions in the world. I remind him about the malign effect of Iran just next door. Hezbollah has been diminished, but they're still there. Hamas has been diminished, but they're still there. I have to say, it's not right to comment on sanctions prescription, but we are talking here about an ally.
Stephen Giffen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, can I welcome the Minister's earlier remarks that the future of Greenland is a matter for the people of Greenland? But will the Minister commit in the way that France and Germany have committed to defend Greenland's territorial integrity against any hostile action?
Well, Mr Speaker, I met the Foreign Minister of Greenland yesterday. It's the second time I've met her actually in the last 4 months. We've discussed a range of issues, including security in the Arctic, our partnership, our trade partnership, and our close engagement on a number of matters, including climate change, science and other areas. So our partnership with Greenland is strong, our partnership with Denmark is strong, and I refer him to the comments I made regarding Greenland's future, which is for the people of Greenland and indeed the people of the Kingdom of Denmark.
Randish.
Mr Speaker. Millions shoehorned into a confined prison, hundreds of communities destroyed, and thousands of people indiscriminately killed, and life-saving humanitarian aid being blocked. Will the Foreign Secretary show consistency and judge Israel on their actions, and at last define that what Netanyahu's apartheid regime is doing to Palestinians is a genocide?
Mr Speaker, we've set out our position on the designation of genocide, so I won't enter into that discussion again, but I will respond to my honourable friend on the questions of aid access, on which my ministerial colleague has spoken already, on which we have been consistent. We are clear that not enough aid is getting into Gaza. We have been clear with the Israeli government in our difference in relation to the conduct of hostilities and in relation to aid access.
Lewis.
Does the government deny that incoming President Trump is deeply hostile to the proposed Chagos Islands giveaway?
Mr Speaker, he will understand that we have support across the United States administration, from the Pentagon, from the State Department, from agencies, from the White House. We are confident that as the details of the deal are provided in the proper way, one administration at a time, as he well knows, that the new administration will recognise that this is an important deal which protects our security and the United States' security and the unimpeded operation of the base on Diego Garcia, which has been our primary objective throughout this process.
Right, that completes questions. Let the front bench change over.